My next guest is running for president. Well, come to think of it, who isn't? He's Congressman Thad McCotter. He's a Republican from Michigan. Who is he? Well, he's a populist, a policy wonk, and he's conservative. But the thing that Thad McCotter may be best known for is quoting Led Zeppelin lyrics on the floor of the House. That sounds like something I ought to play for you, but trust me, it takes way too long. What I will show you instead, though, is this. That's him rocking out on electric guitar at his own presidential campaign announcement earlier this month. I talked to him this evening. Congressman, welcome. I like the guitar better than Huckabee's bass.
Well, thank you. Thank you. As I liked it to Governor, he only plays 4 strings. Some of us can play 6 or 12 if pressed.
Yeah, exactly. How do you get a bass player off the porch? Pay him for the pizza. What? Listen.
There goes the bass player vote.
Exactly. You know what you're hearing everywhere. Mm-hmm. You're too little known, you're too late into the game, and you don't have nearly enough money to pull this off. What makes you think you can become president?
It's the first social networking election for the Republican Party to nominate a president. What we've seen already in this process is people that you hadn't heard of getting traction through the social networking, through the 24-hour news cycle, through the fact that their message resonated for a period of time. We've also seen people implode. So why is your message going to resonate? Well, I'm not presumptuous enough to say that it will. But I believe that if you get in the race and you can put it in front of people, you have the opportunity for them to consider and get behind it and unite. If they don't, then you won't get anywhere. Okay, so what's the message you want to get out there then? And I'll agree, there's a lot of dissatisfaction in the population. You could argue the reason President Obama became president is because at that time there was already the early wave of dissatisfaction with politics as usual. Why are you different? What are you going to bring to the table? Well, I think what we're trying to bring to the table is the things a lot of people aren't talking about. We're seeing in the Republican field talk about limited government. We're not talking about fundamentally restructuring government to match the challenges of our time. As we touched on earlier, you're living in a communications revolution. On a BlackBerry, you can purchase a good or service around the world. It's your laptop at home. You have more access to information and the ability to implement your decisions or your opinions into the community than at any time in human history. And yet what we see opposite our consumer-driven, self-governing society is still the remnants of the welfare state, which is imploding around us. That's number one. Number two, what you also have is the failure of the bailed-out banks to actually be fixed. We have to restructure them to get credit flowing down to help the 14 million unemployed get back to work, to help the 30 million people that can't find better jobs be able to. These are the types of things we need to talk about. In foreign affairs, we all understand the challenges we face in the Middle East, but no one is talking about the long-term threat, our strategic rival, Communist China. You have had no hesitation about attacking other Republicans, which is something that Republicans often don't do. You've referred to the Obama-Romney economy, going after Mitt Romney, saying they're less rivals than running mates. That's not normal Republican talk. Well, it's talk, and it's true. When you look at the underlying premises of 3 of the major initiatives Mr. Romney refuses to say that he was mistaken on, the Wall Street bailout too big to fail principle, the Obamacare, Romney Care comparative effectiveness research, cap and trade's underlying premise of climate change. He still believes that those were proper principles on which to implement decisions. This is very disconcerting to many of us who spend our time in the U.S. House fighting against those. Now, you make a point there. You've been in the House for quite some time now. Well, now, I point out that this is my 9th year. My neighbors are John Dingell and John Conyers, who've been in Congress longer than I've been alive. Okay. Great guys. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. But you know what the argument is against anybody who's been in Washington for 5 years, 6 years, 9 years. If you were going to change things, what have you changed? Well, I measure the legislative process not by simply putting your name on a bill and hoping it gets passed. My first 4 years were spent with a GOP majority that was in decline and not particularly productive in trying to do the restructuring of government that's necessary, let alone deal with Communist China or, obviously, the bailed-out banks. Spent a lot of time trying to fight against very things like the Wall Street bailout, which we thought were wrong. Held a majority of House Republicans against it. Unfortunately, it still passed with a Democratic Congress and a Republican president. You voted for the auto bailouts. Which were not synonymous. We voted to utilize existing loans to help the manufacturers survive to get to a point where they could restructure. The Wall Street bailout was when the TARP money was spent. There's $700 billion parked on Wall Street that came out of Main Street's pocket. You either took part of that when the other bill failed to go back to Main Street to have a manufacturing base, or you don't. Now, as a social construct, to say to the Wall Street bankers that are too big to fail, and evidently, according to the New York Times, too big to jail as well, if you take that money from working people and tell them you're important enough to keep, but you who are blue collar, you who work in the factories, you aren't, you are not only gutting your manufacturing base at a time that China is ready to pass us, but you're also saying to them that some citizens are more important than others, and I fundamentally reject that.
Let me ask you two other things quickly here before we run out of time. Let's do a real-world play acting here. You're the president right now. You're facing this whole thing on the debt ceiling right now. What would you do differently than this president or anybody else to solve this problem?
Well, first, the hypothetical doesn't work because I didn't go on a 2-year spending binge when I controlled everything. But secondly, I support cut, cap, and balance, which is the House Republicans' alternative to this. And I would also add that we have to have a balanced budget amendment submitted to the states. Those are the things that we need to do, because if you listen to the American public, they're very concerned about this, and rightly so. But they also never want to be in this position again. So I would argue cut, cap, balance, and in the long term, you have to have a balanced budget amendment, which puts the sovereign people in the room with the appropriators, because as you know, absent any other higher authority, we seem to keep spending money.
And your favorite guitar player is Jimi Hendrix.
No, I said he was number one.
Number one?
But if I have to sit down...
Above like Clapton and Beck?
Oh, you remember the story.
And Stevie Ray?
Remember the story? Jimi Hendrix is in London.
Yeah.
And Townsend and Clapton go in to watch him and say, who's the new kid in town? And they said they watched him, and they both went home and didn't play guitar for weeks. But if I have to play, I'll play like Townsend or I'll play like Keith Richards, a little simpler.
Well, I got to tell you, you're going to have to do a lot of that because, you know, it's hard to break out of this pack right now. And the biggest criticism is that you're kind of a quiet guy, kind of a thoughtful guy, and that you'll need to break out somehow.
Well, I've heard worse, but I'll take that.
All right, Thad McCotter, good luck with your run. Thanks for coming in. If you win, come back and see us again.
I will.